Okay, so looks like everyone's in the room now that's going to be here, and if there are any latecomers, Grace will let them in as we're going along. So morning everyone, or it's just about good afternoon, I suppose, really, isn't it? Just after 12. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to come to this PPMA webinar. I'm Mark Porter. I'm the head of HR at OneSource, and that's the shared service organisation that provides services to Havering and Newham councils, as well as other organisations too. And I'm your host for the webinar this afternoon. This is just one of a series of webinars from the PPMA throughout the autumn that showcases some of our shortlisted entries from this year's PPMA Excellence in People Management Awards. And these webinars allow PPMA members to learn a bit more about individual entries and ask questions directly to the organisations involved. And today we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Julie Osborne, who's the Managing Director at Osborne Thomas, who's going to talk to us about the entry that she put together with the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea for the Best Employer Brand Award. And just to give you a little bit of context, Kensington and Chelsea is one of the smallest boroughs in the country. It's also one of the most densely populated and diverse. And everyone working there is focused on delivering the best service for their residents, businesses and communities, and nowhere more so than in their digital data and technology service, where the organisation's got big ambitions to transform how they deliver truly life-changing services for their residents. And Julie's going to tell us more about that successful employer brand campaign to recruit the team for Kensington and Chelsea's new digital data and technology service. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about that. So welcome, Julie. Thanks for doing that. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. Session's being recorded so that anybody who can't attend today can watch it on catch up. But don't worry though, only the presenter and me will be visible on the recording, and you can keep your camera on if you want to though. That's entirely up to you. The only thing I do ask though is that we all turn our mics off during Julie's presentation. And we'll have the opportunity for questions at the end. Although if you want to, you can ask questions in the chat as we go along, and then we can pick them up from there. So enough from me. I'm really looking forward to hearing all about what Julie's got to say. So Julie, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. First of all, obviously, we were absolutely delighted to have been shortlisted, not once, but actually twice for Kensington and Chelsea, not just for the employer brand, but also for the candidate experience, which we feel is absolutely vital in any kind of campaign of this ilk. So as Mark says, I am the Managing Director of Osborne Thomas, and my colleague Natasha Hilton-Keane is also on the call, our Director of Recruitment. Natasha and her team were responsible for the majority of the recruitment, so I'm just taking the credit by doing the presentation. For those of you who don't know, Osborne Thomas, we do three things. We recruit permanently, we place interim candidates, all within inside public sector. And one of the biggest things we do is HR consultancy, and this is part of our HR consultancy division. All manner of things, anything from lecturing people on IR35. Yes, people are still very interested in IR35, trust me. All the way through to business process mapping and obviously EVPs such as this. So this presentation concentrates on the latter and what we did with the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and how that led to a successful outcome. Next slide. Maybe. Well, I'll keep them.
Carry on for a moment.
Okay,
got it.
Thank you. So just to give you an overview of this campaign. So in 2021, it was agreed to disaggregate the IT shared service function from Westminster, which is the reason why this campaign came around. So there was a need to build a whole new service within inside RBKC. A whole range of skill sets, as you can imagine, were needed. So everything from ADs of oversight and governance, operations, risk analysts, architects, whether that be integration, enterprise, solutions. In total, nearly 40 roles across the entire aspect of this particular area. So RBKC went out on a tender-wide open process. We were successful in that, which we were delighted about, as you can well imagine, with 40 roles. IT is a real speciality in terms of the amount that we've done over the last couple of years. But part of this programme was to make sure that the culture, the values and the commitment to ED&I was embedded throughout this entire process. So, as I said, lots of different kinds of roles. So these salaries ranged massively. So from over 100,000 to around about 35 to 40,000. So a really wide-ranging campaign, and therefore we need to attract a really wide audience, various skills, various levels of expertise. We also approached all of this during the summer period, which is also interesting. Although, you know, recruitment generally hasn't been horrendous for the last few years in the sort of summer period, it's not the ideal time to go out, and particularly with these amount of roles. However, there was an absolute need for RBKC to establish this department and deliver on the programmes, and the campaign needed to commence. So over the past year, we've been delivering quite a lot of webinars about the recruitment market, excuse me, and giving real specific stats. In fact, we're on to our third version of that at the moment, because the uptake is absolutely incredible of people still struggling to recruit, the amount of areas that are difficult to fill, and reporting things like 2.5 million job ads out there, a couple of 100,000 in any 1 week, makes for a really difficult market to recruit in. There was another stat just the other day about 26,000 people leaving the workforce in the past 3 months just due to ill health. So a really tight market, and therefore we need to do something to stand out from the crowd. Candidates have lots of choice. So why you? Why now? Why should I go to RBKC? Money is always a factor, but it's certainly not the only factor. It's how you present yourselves to the market and the story that we tell that's equally as important. So in the case of RBKC, building a brand to reflect the importance of these roles and attract a really diverse and talented group of people was absolutely imperative in order to get some of these programmes up and running. We always start any campaign, and we believe that it's, whether that's an EVP, whether that's a recruitment campaign, particularly at this scale, with project management. I don't think there's enough of that goes on, and the importance isn't placed on how imperative it is to have proper Prince 2 practitioners running something of this ilk. So whether that's starting with the project initiation documents, capturing all the elements, ensuring risk logs are there, any project creep is logged, we need to make sure everything's on track. An EBP can only work effectively if it runs all the way through the entire campaign. It's not just about the pretty pictures, it's not just about the colours, it's not just about the internal feedback, it's all the way through the process, all the way to onboarding somebody. So for example, does an ATS hinder or help a situation? There's some organisations where you can only review applications at the end of a process. In a market that's this tight, this wasn't going to be effective for us. So we needed to look at something different, take that away, and make sure that people could apply quickly and easily. From the outset, we set up weekly meetings, and I think that's one of the biggest keys to being able to do this effectively. Not only were RBKC and the CIO involved in those meetings, myself, Natasha, 2 of the team were also involved in these meetings, as well as our Prince 2 practitioner, Zuleika, all collectively making sure that this was a smooth process for everybody involved. That's my next slide look, as opposed to my Chris Whitty look. So some internal research had been done by RBKC, and indeed they'd really looked at what their values and behaviours were, and how they wanted to embed ED&I throughout the entire organisation. But we had a really tight timeline on this, 2 weeks to go live. So it was taking all of those aspects into account, looking at the characteristics, looking at the things that RBKC wanted to pull to the forefront. So in conjunction with our partner WDAD, the design agency, we produced the content for the campaign. The whole point was to point people to a microsite, What we wanted to do was give people a lot of information. There was a report just the other day done by LinkedIn that was stating that people are not just skimming job ads, which used to be a real thing. You would have people apply for jobs that have no relevance to them whatsoever. People are now spending up to 10 minutes, which is what LinkedIn are reporting, not only looking at the job ad, but going through to the website or the microsite and reading up about the specifics of each individual role, and then making the decision about whether they should apply or not. So we need to take all of that into account as well. With 40 roles, tranches, and doing this segmented was a real aspect that we needed to take into account. Panels overlapped. Obviously, the amount of people you're going to interview, interview panels can have fatigue as well as candidates having fatigue from being interviewed. So all of that needed to be established at the outset so that when you were a candidate, you knew every single thing that was going to happen to you, when it was going to happen and how. And that's about embedding the value proposition that RBKC are trying to put out there of a good employer, of the right people to work with in the right way. And just to top it all, we had to complete all of this by October. And that was very much, again, aligned with the fact that they needed to deliver and they needed to get moving on all of this. So one of the things we wanted the market to do, even though we weren't going out all at the same time, we wanted the market to understand what was coming up. So we wanted to display the jobs that weren't actually open yet, so that people could look at additional information. They couldn't apply, but they could register interest at that point, so that you could see the whole. It was really important for Kensington that we had overviewing messages from the CIO, from the people of running the departments, and also, excuse me, going through some of the benefits of actually working for Kensington as well. Every time we appointed, big blobs went onto the website to show that things were happening, things were moving. That actually helped people to think, that looks quite interesting. They're filling quite a lot of these jobs quite quickly. That created more interest in the market. But this more information button that's on here wasn't just a JD. This was about the values. This was about who RBKC is. This was also about what specifics we were asking you to do as a data engineer. So we were telling the whole story of what you were going to be walking into and what these roles were really, really about. The JD will only give you an overview. We wanted some really clear, concise information. And again, going all the way back to the value proposition, we wanted to be fair, open. This is what's happening. This is what you would get involved with. So the actual adverts themselves were signposts for the microsite where you could get all of this. So putting it at the heart of everything we do, we are Kensington and Chelsea was the brand message that collectively we did. Excuse me 1 second. It's typical. I woke up this morning with a cold and a cough. What can you do? So putting you at the heart of everything was every single message we put out there. But we wanted to sell all the benefits. And again, in one place, to follow the theme all the way through, everything you came across, those were the messages that were coming through. Candidates are still asking us every single day about flexible working policies. Let's be open. Let's be transparent about it. RBKC operated a hybrid policy, which within the IT sector, sometimes depending on the level of role, is not particularly attractive. So what else can we sell over and above all of that inside this campaign? So bold messages aimed at both the candidate, but also aimed at the residents in terms of that overlying message. So these are our key wins. So the actual department, as I said before, didn't exist. So we were recruiting people to an organisation and a department that wasn't there. The CIO, as I said, was actively involved and so was the panel of interviewers who would take calls from candidates, would actively encourage people to apply. Really, really competitive year for technology, 2022. And as I said, a hybrid model in a sector that expects working from home was not the easiest of things. And I truly believe that this partnership aspect of it was where everything was held together. This dedicated team from RBKC and Osborne Thomas, we met weekly. We talked every single week about the interviews, the onboarding, any issues arising, in order to keep this going all the way through. So delivering a concept and a media schedule in terms of your employee value proposition is only one aspect of it. If it falls away during the recruitment process, falls away by your ATS, the message doesn't mean anything and can die off. Over 50%, thank you, Natasha, over 50% of the candidates were from minority groups and 85% of the fulfilment was actually from search. But on top of that, we also had some excellent feedback from candidates about the process, about the way they were treated. And that is equally as important. So people who were rejected felt that the process had been smooth, had been swift, they understood what was happening, and therefore they went away with the messages we wanted them to go away with of what a good employer RBKC was. This quote from the CIO gives you an overview. Even she alludes to the fact, prime holiday season, not an easy ask. No, thank you, it wasn't. But it was a successful campaign. And I think all of those things together made that campaign successful. I actually asked PPMA why we got shortlisted, because it's always nice to know. And I think it was really interesting that retention and engagement of the candidates was also brought up in this. And that's one of the things that I think we're both proud of in terms of this particular overview of RBKC. So that was a whirlwind tour of an EVP. It lasted approximately 6 months. We completed and we onboarded the team. They're now in situ. They're now getting on with it. Thank you. Any questions?
That's great, Julie. Thank you for that. I mean, I find it absolutely fascinating in terms of sort of like the things that you guys did. Do you know what? I really, really liked the whole project management concept that you were talking about there in terms of sort of managing this piece as a whole project management piece, because it's so important to run it in this way, isn't it? Because it keeps things on track and everything moving forward. You know, that whole rigor of a PID and risk logs and so on as well is absolutely the right way to manage. And to recruit to 40 roles, I mean, what a massive undertaking. So, you know, well done to you, Julie and Natasha, for delivering on that. It's absolutely superb. I can see there's a question here from Kathy. Kathy's asking, how many candidates did you hire?
How many candidates did we hire? There was 40 roles. We filled 38 roles.
Fantastic. I mean,
there was a particular, and some of those issues were around enterprise architects, and the biggest issue was salary. In this market, the local authorities will struggle in that particular area. So that was the biggest stumbling block we had, I would say, unless Natasha wants to chip in with any other areas that were equally as difficult.
Not areas that were as difficult, but just to say that I think as we did recruit to some roles, some briefs changed on some of the later roles. So as they started to build in some of those skill sets, they started to evaluate what they actually needed further down the line. So whilst we started off with one set of roles at the beginning, that actually became slightly different as we got towards the end. So things did move around a little bit in that way as well.
Okay. I mean, I loved those blobs that you said, Julie, that kept appearing saying appointed, because that kind of really keeps the sort of the whole interest from potential people as well, isn't it? Saying, oh well, look, actually that they're getting through into roles here. I might be interested in that too as well. That's a really smart move as well.
Yeah, I think it really added something to it. You know, it was a hell of a lot, as you can imagine, candidates that went through to recruit that amount of people. Yeah. And again, I can't emphasize enough on a campaign that size, project management for me is the activity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd say the same. And I love that whole, the piece you said there about communication throughout the whole process as well, Julie. So you're right from the start, you're letting candidates know exactly what's going to be expected of them. So they can sort of like plan ahead and, you know, mark things in. But actually, managers as well, who sometimes can also be like, oh, well, no, I'm busy on that day. Oh, I told you.
Yes, absolutely. And scheduling all of that in, both from the fantastic lady over at RBKC and our Zuleika as our project manager, together, they made sure that didn't happen.
Yeah. Kathy's got another question here. Kathy, why don't you come off mute and ask, that's me asking your questions for you. Why don't you jump off mute and you can ask a question. Oh, hi, Kathy. Oh, hiya. You want to ask your question? Ready for your question now, Kathy? Oh, you're on mute. We have a fine system in our meetings. We put 50p into the charity pot. If you're talking, you're on mute. Maybe it might be a problem with the technology, Kathy. I'll ask. So, what was your biggest challenge, Julie and Natasha?
A plethora of challenges. The timescale to get it up, running and going. The fact that it was a new area and a new department, as Natasha alluded to a minute ago, roles were changing as we were recruiting. Yeah. The sheer volume and managing that sheer volume, not necessarily for us, but certainly I don't think RBKC expected that amount all at the same time. So organising hiring managers, as I'm sure you will all know, was probably one of the biggest challenges.
I think the onboarding as well, and the pressure that then added on to HR, teams sorting out, even just down to little things like laptops and making sure everyone had the equipment ready at the right time and just keeping track of all of that. We had to be really on top of it.
I think that's a good thing as well, Natasha. And you know, when Julie was saying there around, it's not just the recruitment campaign. Then you guys have sort of like stepped away. Actually, the onboarding piece is just as important, isn't it, to finish off that whole experience for the candidate.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Come back to us, the candidates would still ask us what was happening. So the fact that the references hadn't been taken up yet, so we had to be actively involved in that, or we would be in danger of losing those candidates in a really tough market. So yeah, we wouldn't let go.
No, and those later weekly meetings with RBKC, we started to involve a lot of the HR team at those meetings, who would let us know what their challenges were in terms of the onboarding, and you know, communication with the candidates just became really key as to, yeah, there is a delay, but this is why it is, and this is the date that we're working to.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, apologies, Kathy. I think everybody's on mute apart from me and Julie and Natasha. So there's me saying, "Oh, Kathy, ask your question." And, everyone's on mute, so apologies. But any other questions from anybody? Anything else that anyone's
I couldn't read
from Steph there. Has the campaign led you to changing your recruitment process for other roles as well?
Yeah, and as I say, I think the biggest one is the project management. We would do it sporadically and every so often, apologies, but now we're doing it more frequently. Let me just get rid of that. I can't get rid of it.
Now, as soon as anything that's multiple roles, we would automatically involve a project management aspect. It was so valuable, and it taught us so much as to what it can add during that process, keeping everyone on track and having such a clear view of how things are running. Now we've made it much more standard.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, thanks, Natasha. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Steph, for that question. Any more questions from anybody? No? Okay, so then if there are no more questions, I'd just like to say thank you, everyone, for making the time to come to the webinar today. Thanks to Julie and Natasha as well for an excellent presentation. And hopefully that's given you food for thought for things that you can absolutely take back to your own organisations. I've picked up a couple of things here as well that we absolutely will as well. Just a couple of quick plugs before we go. The PPMA virtual conference takes place next week on Wednesday, the 20th of September. It's free to attend. So if you have a look at the PPMA website for details of how to book your place, you can pick those up there. And if you've never been before, it's definitely worth attending. Some great speakers and presenters lined up for the day. And as I said earlier, this is one of a series of webinars from the PPMA. So keep an eye on the PPMA website for details of our next one. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you soon at another PPMA webinar or an in-person event. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
bye.
you.